Why the Cross by Father Edward Leen, Part 1, The Tree of Death, Chapter 6, Second Reading. God wishes His creatures not only to exhaust all the possibilities of natural happiness, but rising beyond all that, to experience a happiness that of its nature is divine. God was not content that His rational creatures should be limited to that happiness which the full evolution of their natural powers would yield. He would have them taste the very beatitude that He Himself enjoys. He willed that they should have not merely a human, but a divine experience. He was not content with creating. He would recreate. He determined to infuse a vitality into the essence of the soul and energies into its faculties, which would enable it to live a life similar to His own. He willed His creature, endowed with reason, to contemplate what He Himself contemplated, and to love what He Himself loved. He threw open to its gaze the boundless realm of the uncreated, and offered to its embrace not pale, created reflections of the divine beauty, but that infinite, everlasting, ever ancient, ever new beauty itself. God breathed on the already living soul a breath of His own living being, and by that breath the tide of divine life flowed through the realms of the created spirit. By this act of recreation, there penetrated into the substance of the soul divine grace, and into the faculties of the will and intellect the infused divine virtues of faith, hope, and charity. Man's rational powers were further strengthened by the infused supernatural moral virtues of prudence and justice. Man's sensitive nature was rectified by the infused moral virtues of temperance and fortitude. The soul by divine grace was fashioned to a likeness with God. It reflected the features of the Creator and became apt to live His life. Happiness is the result of a full life. The infinite happiness of God springs from His infinitely perfect life. Man, vivified by the recreative breath of God, is enabled to exercise vital activities like to those of God, and thus participate in God's happiness. That beatitude was not, of course, to be enjoyed straightway in full measure. A period of growth and imperfection, measured by the time of earth's pilgrimage, was to be followed by an eternity of maturity and perfection. But happiness was to be man's lot in both periods of his existence, a happiness strictly proportioned to the perfection with which he should live God's life in each. God, incompletely and dimly seen in this world, would be contemplated face to face in the world to come. The shadows and vicissitudes that attend the love of God in time would pass and yield place to a perfect and constant love in eternity. In its everlasting home, the soul is destined to possess in finite measure that same treasure which God possesses infinitely. Sharing in the divine life, it is privileged to participate in that boundless joy which God derives from the experience of infinite life. The soul tastes divine happiness by entering into intimate and vital union with God dwelling within it. The privilege of entering into God's life and consequent happiness, though granted in its perfect form in heaven, is not denied to earth, though in a form less perfect. For the soul, by the divine energy with which it is endowed through sanctifying grace, is enabled to react upon God dwelling within it, and to enter into ever fuller and more perfect possession of Him. God is present in all things, giving to each the existence proper to it. He is more intimate to each being than that being is to itself. Yet in the whole universe, it is only of the rational being that it can be said that it holds or possesses God. The rest are upheld by, but do not lay hold of, God. If the soul were without grace, it would be similarly circumstanced. God would be in it, but would not be possessed by it. Through Him and from Him it would derive its natural existence and nothing more. It would lie insensible and unresponsive to the touch of God. It is otherwise when sanctifying grace flows through it. By this element of divine life, it is dowered with an energy greater than the natural, by which it can react to the presence of God and enter into vital, intimate, and personal relations with Him. These new relations between God and the soul are vital with the vitality of a divine life. Thus, when over and above its natural existence, God gives the created spirit a participation of His own life and being, there is brought about in the relations between Creator and creature a condition that differs widely, it might be said infinitely, from that which marks these relations when the bond between them is merely that of natural existence. God dwells lovingly and as a person loved in the soul in grace. He is at home there. He becomes an object of the soul's contemplation and its love. The created intellect, strengthened by the divine virtue of faith, fixes its gaze on the blessed Trinity dwelling within the soul and wrapped in the veils of created images. The will, fortified by the divine virtue of charity, chooses God in person as the object of its affection. Through the virtue of hope, the soul is encouraged to inspire to intimate friendship with its Creator, and is rendered unshaken in its confidence that faith and charity will be ultimately rewarded by an ever clearer vision and an ever fuller possession of the infinite good. By these virtues, the soul establishes living contact between itself and God. By them it attaches itself to the divinity, and from that union it derives a divine life and energy. As at the touch of Moses' wand, waters gushed forth from the rock to slake the thirst of the parched Israelites, so at the action of faith and charity, waters of life gush from God to refresh and vivify the soul. This is the figure chosen by the Savior to describe this mysterious interchange between the Creator and the creature in the supernatural life. In this contact with God and intimacy with Him is found that happiness for which man was created and for which he craves. Jesus stood and cried, saying, If any man thirst, let him come to me and drink. He that believeth in me, as the Scripture saith, out of his bosom shall flow rivers of living water. And earlier he had said, "The water that I shall give him shall become in him a fountain of water, springing up into life everlasting." The soul finds its life and nourishment in the divinity and only there. Deprived of this nourishment, it languishes and dies. Though being immortal, it continues to exist. The created spirit is a living thing, and like all living things, must have something wherewith to nourish itself, and which shall minister to its strength and growth. God, in his infinite condescension, has deigned to constitute himself the connatural food of the spirit he has created. The soul must feed on God or die. True, it is immortal, and as such must have an unending existence. It cannot suffer dissolution, for being simple, it has no component parts into which to decompose. But mere existence is not life. The demons and the damned exist forever, and yet are said to be lost in eternal death. The body itself can be said, in a certain sense, to exist perpetually, for the elements of matter of which it is composed are not annihilated after the bodily structure has been broken up. Yet the body is said to be dead when the soul departs. What the soul is to the body, by analogy, God is to the soul. God is the life of the soul because God is its food. By its intellect and will, the soul, as it were, lays hold on God and assimilates him to itself, or rather is assimilated to him. For whereas in the natural order the food that is consumed is elevated to the condition of the living organism that nourishes itself by it, in the supernatural order the process is reversed. The soul does not draw its food to a human condition, but by it is itself raised to a divine condition. Feeding on God, it becomes gradually divine. The body requires nourishment only at intervals. The soul has an incessant need of what ministers to its life. In every act of faith, inspired by charity, it supplies this need. God alone can satisfy the soul. It is not meant to experience a moment of dissatisfaction. Jesus said, "Whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again. But he that shall drink of this water that I will give him shall not thirst forever." The woman saith to him, "Sir, give me this water, that I may not thirst, nor come hither to draw." Compare these words of Bossuet. The soul drinks of a water unsuited to it, when it seeks pleasure in the objects of sense. The wise man teaches that the soul need not quit itself, nor divert streams from some distant mountain, since it has within itself an everlasting and inexhaustible living fountain. Hence the acts of the divine virtues are intended by God not to be occasional or intermittent. In his plan, every pulsation of the soul's deliberate life is meant to be one of faith, animated by hope and charity. Every movement of the will that has not this tendency to union with God is lost. It is a casting away of real life. The soul is a capacity for the infinite. It is therefore a capacity for God. The soul's great reality lies in this, that it is a capacity for the infinite, while being itself a finite thing. The only living being that can physically, that is, in its substantial reality, find entrance to the soul is the God that made it. To everything created, even to angels and demons, the soul is an inviolable sanctuary. The consequence is that the soul cannot find in any created thing what can minister to its true life and enlarge its being. It cannot, by taking thought or by cleaving to creatures, add 1 cubit to its stature. It is the reason why all efforts to satisfy itself with creatures ends in dissatisfaction. This is the law of our creation. St. Augustine, addressing himself to God, "Our heart is ever restless until it rests in Thee." The Venerable Lieberman echoes this thought, saying, God made our souls mere empty things in themselves. It is true that they are possessed of powers and faculties in virtue of which they bear a resemblance to God. But these are mere potentialities of that which as yet is not. Not possessing any reality in itself wherewith to satisfy itself, the soul can and ought to seek in God that happiness of which it feels the want. The soul created to enjoy God is made in consequence to be happy. It receives in its creation an impulse to go outside of itself, or rather to enter into itself, and there find that which, not being anything of itself, can make it happy. It is not possible for it to have or to find this blessedness in its own substance. Otherwise, God would not have been true to his wisdom in creating it as he did. The soul, then, being in extreme need of finding wherewith to satisfy itself and quiet its cravings, and not discovering the wherewithal in itself, resembles a man tortured by hunger and by thirst. This is the image employed by divine wisdom. This hunger and thirst set in activity those 3 powers by which it directs itself toward God, in order to nourish itself on the divine food of his grace and his justice. These 3 powers are faith, hope, and charity. This triple tendency toward God of the faculties of the soul, memory, intellect, and will, operating through the divine virtues of faith, hope, and charity, is called in scriptural language to hunger and thirst after justice. All those who have the grace to tend in this way toward God receive his communications and so find their happiness. Blessed are they that hunger and thirst after justice, for they shall have their fill. God demands that man conform his will to the divine will, for unless that conformity exists, God's loving purposes in creating cannot be realized. What does God demand of man in return for the divine benefits conferred on him? Strange as it appears to our calculating instincts, God demands nothing. All that he asks is that man should be content to receive and to set up no barriers against what God is only too anxious to give. Man is required to conform his will to that of his Creator, for without such conformity, God's communication to man is impossible. If the human will is set in opposition to the divine, contact between the Creator and the creature is broken, and the stream of divine life is cut off from the human soul. A comparison drawn from electrical lighting illustrates this truth. So that the electric bulb and filaments glow with light, the lamp must be connected to electrical energy. If disconnected by the turning off of a switch, the light goes out and darkness results. God does not demand the subjection of man's will to him for any satisfaction to be enjoyed because of such subjection. He demands it because it is an indispensable condition for the work of sanctifying the human soul. Man must use his freedom to subject himself willingly to the divine ruling. God will not force his submission. God, who made us without our will, says St. Augustine, cannot save us without our will. The life of grace does not consist in this subordination of the human will to the divine. The subordination of, or conformity of, the will of the creature to that of the Creator is but that which conditions the divine life. That divine life is a substantial communication of the life of God to the soul. God's action in creating man was an action of divine disinterestedness. The purpose of it was to give and not to receive. It was an action of infinite generosity, because what was bestowed on man was nothing less than the divinity itself. The Creator willed man to participate in the bliss of the divine life and to share in the divine experience. All that was demanded of man in return was that he should be willing and ready to receive the gift of God. The gift is the vision of God by faith in this world, to expand into the vision face to face in the world to come. Heavenly beatitude is but the full and final flowering of grace. Man disposes himself for this by using his freedom to keep his will subject to the will of God. Want of subjection ruptures the relation between the creature and the Creator. It breaks contact, and without that contact, it is impossible for God to give himself to man. In the beginning, God so endowed man's nature with exceptional gifts that this conformity of the creature's will to that of the Creator's involves neither hardship nor struggle.